My name is Andre Gunter. I'm from SwordCTSpace. I'm a senior business consultant and project manager, focusing on rail, energy, and large AEC environment. Some of the challenges that I've faced, that most projects face, is the coordination and distribution of information. They come from, I suppose, very often widely dispersed project teams, maybe some of them dispersed across the globe, which makes the coordination and the management of process flow and document flow that much more challenging. Being able to use centralized working method will help many projects report more accurately on the deliverables of a project, and also understand more accurately which documents have been issued at any point during that process, and understand exactly where a document is in its life cycle in a phase of a project. With any project, large or small, depending on when the project starts, there's always the biggest challenge is managing the vast quantities of data that is passed through a project and that changes hands through the review processes, issuing processes, review processes, and approval processes that are actively pursued on a project. It's also difficult for a project to actually establish any common working method, and very often when you deal with diverse and different project team stakeholders, they each work to their own method, and very often it's very difficult to coordinate that in any way, purely because occasionally it hasn't been agreed contractually, and they then just filter their documents in through a central repository or a central resource, which means they then you have a bottleneck in a sense, and they are not actually participating in any way to building up a project's collateral. With larger projects, there's also continual change. Very often, when you have large numbers on the larger projects, they're very large workforces. Clearly, there's the continuity of resource is important, and you will get high staff turnover. So, having a situation whereby information is easily passed from an incumbent to a new person is something that is sought after and something that is not often achieved. What is being proven is that between 70 and 80% of rework on a project is caused through the use of an incorrect version of a document once it's been revised. And in some cases, we have found that the document could be 3 to 4 versions out of date, and it is still being used when it's been superseded. Clearly, this is a risk, and it's one that a more centralized approach would mitigate. In many cases, it's quite difficult for project managers to understand very accurately the risk profile that they are faced with, and very often the risk profile is intangible. They don't physically understand what it is they're exposed to until an event occurs, at which point they then are more reactive than proactive. And what they're clearly looking for is a more proactive way of managing risk, and more particularly managing compliance on projects. Running in hand with that, it is also extremely important that a system, some form of audit history is maintained, so that when at any point during a project's life cycle, if an audit history or information needs to be retrieved, it can be done so efficiently and easily, and that information is then readily available to be used in any way that is required. And in many cases, there is clearly a use when claims are being made against maybe a contractor or an asset owner, and that's where it becomes extremely valuable. The operational cost on larger projects is one which carries a higher overhead, purely due to the vast quantities of information that is being fed into the project and the need for that information to be managed. What is needed very often is a centralized way of managing that information, so that you are literally reducing the headcount where possible, and that the system is in fact doing a lot of the work at the sharp end where the data is being produced, so that it can be fed into the system and then QA'd, as opposed to fed into the system upstream as opposed to downstream. What many projects suffer from is the ability to actually draw upon a centralized repository which contains every single piece of project information. This is clearly not always possible due to the way that traditionally projects are managed and the way that traditionally data is distributed and sent around a project. A more centralized approach will give projects far more visibility of information and will reduce the amount of effort in retrieving information, and will also dramatically decrease the amount of rework that is required on a project, because everybody on the project will understand that they are using and are able to access the most recent piece of information at any point during the project's life cycle.